Today I have with me Dr. Glenn Livingston, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Glenn Livingston is a veteran psychologist and a longtime CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm which serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. Dr. Glenn's work, theories, and research have been published in major periodicals like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Chicago Times. He became disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and or food obsessed individuals. And Dr. Livingston then spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and a self funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. Most important was his own personal journey out of obesity and food prison, which we're going to be talking about today, to a normal, healthy weight and a much better, lighthearted relationship with food. So, why are we overeating, stress eating, binge eating? Why is this so prevalent today? We are going to talk about this, the food industry, the bad psychological model of addiction, and more. Dr. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
I would love to dive into your background a little bit before we unpack the binging and food obsession that is so prevalent. So you were actually working in the food industry. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I had a dual career. I was married to a woman who traveled for business, and I didn't commute and I didn't have kids. So I was on the wrong side. I had a child and family practice, but I was also on the wrong side of the war. I was consulting for food industry, the advertising industry, also big pharma. And I'm trying to make up for it later in my life, in the second half of my life. But I was definitely part of, selling sugar and concentrated forms of excitotoxins and that kind of thing. So, yeah. And before that, I had a very serious food problem myself. So I never set out to be an overeating doctor. As a matter of fact, I would refer people out because I had problems myself. Um, but after taking about 20 years to figure out how to solve my own problem, and then writing a journal about it, when I got divorced in 2015, I turned that journal into a book, and that book got popular, and I wound up being a guy who's worked with thousands of overeaters and has millions of readers. And that's a very, very, very short version of my story. I can tell you more and more relevant parts if you'd like, but that's kind of what happened. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you have that perspective of having worked with big pharma, with the food industry, but then also coming out the other side, and now with this new perspective, I imagine that it really can help you to help others because you understand this in a way that many of us cannot. How exactly is the food industry and big pharma using psychologists? In what capacity are they
Oh, well,
using them?
I was in advertising research.
Okay.
So I'd figure out how people attach their emotional values to reasons for purchase. And I was the assistant teacher for a fancy course called the Multivariate Modeling of Behavior in graduate school, which basically meant that I knew how to design observational studies that would infer what was going on rather than having to ask people directly. And there's a problem with asking people directly about their emotional values and purchase because people like to think that they're a smart shopper. And so there's a social desirability bias and they feel embarrassed if they understand they're making emotional decisions. So the companies wanted to do it more observationally instead. Um, I always feel a little sheepish talking about this because I feel like I shouldn't have been doing it. Um, but like I said, I'm trying to make up for it now. Yeah. No, but the value of it to me was that I, I'd been raised in a family of 17 psychotherapists. And if anything broke in the household, people would ask it how it felt and nobody knew how to fix it. And when I was 9 years old, I would have my little friends come over and lie down on the couch and tell me about their mother. Um, and so I was very interested in depth psychology. And when I recognized that I had a problem myself, which was pretty serious, I mean, I was almost 300 pounds at one point. I, I, I went the psychological route to try to fix it. And I figured I had a hole in my heart. And if I could fill that hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to keep trying to fill the hole in my stomach. Um, I went to see the best psychologists and psychiatrists, and I confessed my soul, and I cried and I screamed, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I had a spiritual awakening, and it was all. I even took medication at one point. It's all. It was a valuable journey for me psychologically, in as much as I wound up feeling more compassion for myself. I certainly didn't hate myself the same way that I used to, but I would get a little thinner and a lot fatter every time that I tried it. It was kind of go
Mm.
down, up, down, up, down, up. And the consulting for industry did a couple of things for me. It it convinced me that there were external forces that had nothing to do with our personal psychology. So, I saw them paying millions of dollars to engineer these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and oil and salt and excitotoxins. And it was to create these food-like substances, and they're geared towards hitting the bliss point of the reptilian brain without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. And when you do that, that's when you have this compulsive, addictive result. Now, I don't think that addiction is a disease. I don't think compulsion is a disease. I think it's the sign of a healthy brain being corrupted by a fairly sick food society. Um, we can talk more about that a little later if you want to. But the point was that this was an external force, and it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I was in a bad marriage or that I was lonely or that, my mom had dropped me on my head when I was a kid or any of that kind of thing. It just didn't have to do with that. The other thing I saw was that the advertising industry was very good at making these packaged goods look, sound, and feel like you're supposed to have them. Like this is where the good stuff is. And, for example, I remember working with a food bar manufacturer who they took the vitamins out of the bar and they put a lot of effort into the packaging. So the packaging was multicolored and diverse and vibrant. And when you did that, what you're doing is stimulating the part of the brain that recognizes nutrition in a multicolored, diverse patch of fruits and vegetables in the world. So this is where we're told to eat the rainbow. If you have a red tomato and blueberries and green lettuce and yellow carrots and red peppers, you're eating a diversity of micronutrients. But in this case, it was more of a predatory practice because it looked like it. They were kind of faking this out. It looks like that's the case, but it's not the case. There are not extra, vitamins in the bar. So, and that kind of thing went on across the industry. There's a lot of effort into creating plausible deniability, like these potato chips are made with avocado oil, so therefore they must be good for you, right? And ignoring the fact that most studies on heated oil suggest that it's carcinogenic. Most studies on the effects of acrylamides that are created when you're cooking, potatoes at very high temperatures. Most of them say that those are not good for you either. But the reptilian brain is the rational brain is just looking for an excuse, which I'll call plausible deniability. There's this star on the potato chip that says made with avocado oil, and then because the brain is not really in a rational state, it just kind of has to slip by that sensor. The reptilian brain takes over, and the rational brain doesn't really object because you have this. Well, it's really good for you. It's with avocado oil. And there are just all kinds of things like that. And I say, well, that has nothing to do with this hole in my heart. This is an attack on the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain doesn't know love. I remembered from graduate school studying in neurology that the reptilian brain is the seat of survival response, emergency survival response, like fight, flight, freeze, or feast and famine. But love, so if this is the reptilian brain, it's looking at the environment and asking, do I eat it? Do I mate with it, or do I kill it? Like a bad college drinking game, right? And on top of that, it's the mammalian brain that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact is that going to have on your loved ones and your tribe and your family? And then it's the neocortex that says, what impact does that have on your long-term goals like health and fitness, and spirituality and art and music and work and contribution and everything like that, all those things that make us uniquely human. But it's the reptilian brain that says, just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. And so this thing doesn't know love. I'm making a joke, but it's true. This thing doesn't know love, and it can push everything else out of the way because we're designed so that if our primitive survival needs are threatened, or if there's a perceived emergency or a perceived scarce opportunity, like the availability of lots of calories in a small space for little effort is an emergency opportunity to the reptilian brain because we evolved in a much more scarce food environment. You couldn't go downstairs and get 100,000 calories for $100 at the convenience store all those years ago. So, so I said, these are just external forces. It has nothing to do with love, but I'm trying to love myself thin. Something's wrong here. So after about 20 years, these kind of insights came to me through a variety of sources and a variety of experiences. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stop trying to nurture my inner wounded child back to health in order to fix my eating. And I'm going to try to take charge like the alpha wolf of my own mind. Like, I want to be this thing up here and I want to put this thing in its place. And I keep saying, well, you don't love yourself enough, or you need to cry or get a hug or, fix something like that in your life. What if it's more of a matter that I just have to control a bodily organ? Like, I control my bladder. I am in control. My bladder is not in control. Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, if I really had to pee right now, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm talking to Carol. I'm in control. You aren't, Mr. Bladder. And, I'll take care of you later. I'm not going to ignore my bodily needs, but I can wait an hour. I'm going to get through this interview first. And I don't have to pee, so please don't worry. But or the same thing with if I saw an attractive woman outside, I don't know, run up and kiss her, right? There are ways of approaching things in a civilized society. I'm not going to listen to my, reproductive organs just because there's an attraction. So I'm in charge, and my body's not in charge. I'm in charge. I can make decisions in a civil society, regardless of how strong these biological needs might be. Why are food decisions any different? Why can't I make decisions about what I'm going to eat and not let my reptilian brain take over? Um, so I had that study with the 40,000 people when internet clicks were cheap. And it was about when people were feeling stressed, looking for solutions, what were they having trouble to stop overeating? And I was looking for correlations. And I found that if people were stressed about work, they tended to be overeating on chips and salty, crunchy things, pretzels, like that. If they were stressed about something at home, they tended to overeat on bagels and pasta and soft, chewy kinds of things. And if they were feeling lonely or brokenhearted or depressed, then they tended to overeat chocolate. And I was of the latter type. My binges always started with chocolate. And so I called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm trying to figure this out. I think I got something. Why do I go to chocolate when I feel lonely or depressed or brokenhearted? Did something happen in my upbringing? I mean, I know I'm a little unhappy in the marriage and I eventually wound up getting divorced, but why do I go to chocolate when I'm lonely or brokenhearted or depressed? And my mom gets this horrible look on her face. And she says, I'm so sorry, honey. And I said, Mom, it doesn't matter. This is decades ago. I love you. I forgive you. I just want to figure this out. And she said, I'm so sorry. But when you were 1 year old in 1965, your dad, my husband, was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I was really scared I was going to be an army widow. And you had your sister.
Right.
Yeah, sister's on the way. I'm going to be an army widow with 2 young kids. Then your grandfather, my father, had just gotten out of prison. And I always idolized this man, and I didn't know that I didn't know he was guilty, and he was. And I was just almost catatonic. My whole world fell apart. And so when you would come running to me for love or to play or to cuddle, um, I would say, go get your Bosco, Glenn. I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco. I don't know if you remember Bosco. I'm a little older than you, but there's a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And apparently I'd go running over to it or crawling over to it. And I take out the bottle and I suck on the cap and I go into a chocolate sugar coma. And you'd think that if this were the movies, if it was really the original trauma that caused the addiction, that at that point I'd have a movie moment and mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry and I'd never struggle with chocolate again. Um, and it was a cathartic moment. It was over Skype, so I couldn't hug her, but it was a very cathartic moment. I felt like more forgiving of myself. I could certainly forgive my mom. I felt compassion for what she was going through. I asked her a whole bunch of questions after that. I learned all kinds of things about her, at 40 years old that I didn't think I would ever know, or 42, whatever it was. But my chocolate eating actually got worse. And so did the rest of the binge because the chocolate would start it. And I figured out the reason was I discovered this little voice in my head. I'm not schizophrenic. It's just a cluster of thoughts. But I found this little voice in my head that would say, you know what, Glenn, you're right. Our mama didn't love us enough. And she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can, fix the marriage or get out and find the love of your life, you're going to have to go right at eating chocolate to fill it up. Let's go get some right now. Yippee. It's like it sees on this as a reason to justify overeating more. And at that point, it really kind of broke through my denial. And I said, I have to try something different. This is not working. And so I reconceptualized what was going on. I used to think that I had to put out the fire. I had all this emotional trauma and I had to put out the fire. At that point, I said, what if the fire is just the fire? And what if I could put it in a fireplace instead and contain it with a really well-functioning fireplace? If you think about it, a roaring fire in a well-contained fireplace in the living room, it's an asset. It's not a liability. It's something that people gather around. They tell stories. They hug. They make memories. It's only when something's poking holes in the fireplace that you can have ashes get out and burn the house down. And so I realized that, well, maybe my pig, not my pig, I eventually called that my inner pig. You don't have to call it that. Maybe this reptilian brain of mine, maybe this biological organ was coming up with these reasons for justification. And I had to figure out how to know when it was active, and I had to put out the fire. I had to fix the fireplace, not put out the fire. And that turns out to be the basis of how I actually got better. It's not the whole story, but I did something kind of embarrassing for a sophisticated psychologist. I decided to call it my inner pig. I guess I upstaged myself like that. I now know you don't have to do that. You can call it your inner food monster or whatever, but I called it my inner pig. And I would say I'm going to make a really clear line on the sand so that I know when this thing is active. And my first line on the sand was I will never have chocolate on a weekday again. And then if I was in Starbucks and I was paying for my coffee and there was a chocolate bar on the counter and I heard a little voice in my head that said, you could just start your silly rules again tomorrow. You worked out hard enough, even though it's a Wednesday. You're not going to gain any weight. I'd say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my inner pig. It's squealing for pig slop because chocolate on a Wednesday is pig slop. And I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as crazy as it sounds, it kind of opened up the space between stimulus and response for me. And it gave me those extra microseconds to make a better decision. I can't say I immediately always made a better decision. Sometimes I still indulged, but there was a space. There was a little time to do that. Over time, that space got a little bigger. The rules got a little better. And I figured out that what I could do in that space was tell the pig why it was wrong. So for example, when the pig says it'll be just as easy to start your diet tomorrow, I would say it's not. That's actually not true, because the way that the brain works by the principle of neuroplasticity, if I have a craving for chocolate today, and I have the thought just start tomorrow, and I break the rules and I indulge myself, I've actually reinforced the craving and I've reinforced the thought. So I'm going to have a stronger craving for chocolate tomorrow, and I'm going to be more likely to say start tomorrow, tomorrow, which means that if I'm in a hole, I got to stop digging. I can only ever use the present moment to be healthy. So that would be how I would rationally disempower what my pig was saying. And over the course of many years, I kept a journal and I figured out all the different things my pig would say to, get me to break my rules. And I stopped breaking the rules after some time, and I got thin, and I had a whole bunch of symptoms that went away also, like psoriasis and eczema and rosacea and stuff. Um, but, well, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
Well, it's interesting to me because it's this combination of what's happening, as you said, with the lizard brain, the pig brain, and also the emotional factors, whatever we have in our past, kind of coming together here, if I'm understanding you correctly. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, I used to do bodybuilding shows. I did 16 bikini bodybuilding shows. And if you're familiar with that process, each and every time you go through your lean out, they call it your prep, which is 12 to 16 weeks. It's like throwing things off the bus food wise. Certain things you cannot have as you get closer and closer to stage. The reason being, you get on stage, you need to be lean enough that the judges can see all of the definition. Well, what I didn't know going in, I discovered later, was what that process would do to my brain. And when you get that lean, you get your body fat down that low, your brain literally just screams at you. It doesn't care, okay, Carol needs to look great in a bikini. She's got a bodybuilding show. It just screams at you, survive, eat. And I remember because I don't like fast food. I don't crave fast food, but I remember just like driving down the road, right, driving to work the first couple of times I did the competition and smelling some of the fast food restaurants as I went by and thinking, oh, I really would love to go through that drive through and get those fries, or I would smell donuts or something that I would normally not even want. Then I would do the competition, stay disciplined, and the first couple of times I came off of that, I wanted to eat all of the things. It was like having zero control, and I didn't understand what was going on at the time, that my there was an imbalance in my hunger hormones. My body fat was so low that my brain was trying to protect me, keep me safe, get me to eat all of the things so that I wasn't so ultra lean. But I remember feeling like, oh, there's something, and being embarrassed, like there's something wrong with me. Why am I binging after these shows? And it was just interesting to hear you talk about how you have these conversations kind of with yourself, with your brain. I did the same thing. And that was how I finally got that under control, where, okay, let me reason this out. Carol, this isn't you. It's just, you've been leaning down, you're ultra lean, your leptin is out of balance, your ghrelin is screaming at you. And once I understood the science behind it, and
Hmm.
I believe I work with my clients this way too. I think it helps them because it gets rid of that guilt and that
And the
shame.
shame. Yeah. Yeah. No, and you have to be careful with a rules-based approach not to become too over restrictive, because if you deprive your body of what it really needs, then there is that sense of organismic distress, and that does make it more likely that your reptilian brain will perceive an emergency and try to push your rational brain out of the way. So I tell people that you can't try to lose weight too quickly. That if you really want to stop overeating or binge eating, that you need to flood your body with nutrition on a regular basis, at a slight caloric deficit if you want to lose weight, and that targeting, well, for men maybe like 13 to 15% body fat as opposed to 8% body fat is going to be a lot safer than going to the levels that the bodybuilders usually want to go to. Um, I actually have less success with bodybuilders because of the extremes in their
Interesting.
routines. I try to work
Really?
with them. I mean, I think they do better than if they don't work with us, but bodybuilders who binge usually have to come up with a more reasonable approach if they want to stop. That's what I found anyway. I haven't found the solution for that.
It's a tough one, and I think a lot of them, especially the women, will go in not really understanding because I didn't understand, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get lean and ripped and shredded and all of the things, and then that's how I'm going to look. Like I thought I could sustain that,
Yeah,
and
yeah. No,
finding
no,
out that I couldn't.
it's about peaking for a little while. Yeah.
It
No,
is.
I mean, I keep myself in the like 14 or 15% range, and I find that much easier than I've been down as low as 10, and I just found it really difficult to sustain. I was just way too hungry, and my life was more important to me than how I looked in a bathing suit. I wanted to be free of the impulse to binge. I wanted to have my cravings under control. And so I work better at a slightly more reasonable level. I hope I'm not losing half of your audience now because I'm sure you have a lot of bodybuilders that follow you. But yeah,
I I I want to touch on how our basically evolution kind of collides with the modern day because you hit on this where we we have certain mechanisms for survival, and maybe even at a certain point it was to our benefit to almost be insulin resistant in a sense. So now we are in the modern day world where food is readily available. So much of our history, food was not readily available. There were famines, there wasn't enough. And so our bodies had to adapt in order to survive. But then we fast forward to today where there's food on every corner and it's so convenient, and there's advertisements and there's the packaging and the color and the smells and the hyper palatability. I feel that it is really almost impossible to moderate that. You know, you hear people talk about moderation, and that sounds so nice. It sounds so pretty. But when you're moderating, trying to moderate something so addictive, how can someone do that?
so there is actually something I can teach people to help you to try to moderate. But I will say that many people find that none is easier than some, and especially with sugar, flour, alcohol, and some of the packaged goods. However, um, can I explain some more of the science of cravings and what it meant in evolution?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes, I think that would be useful.
and then I'll get back. Please remind me to get back to the idea about moderating and why there's a very special technique you can use to consider if you really want to do that. And I largely don't do that. I largely stay away from packaged goods entirely myself, and I never eat chocolate. And on a very rare occasion, I will plan out a pasta meal or something like that in a very specific context and a very specific amount. But it is difficult to moderate given what's happened in the modern food environment. So, okay, first of all, if you have stronger cravings than other people, it's because you have a healthier brain than other people, not because you have a sickness or something wrong with you. 100,000 years ago, if we were not extraordinarily motivated to figure out how to find food and then go find it, we would have starved. So it was a survival advantage to have very strong cravings. Secondly, cravings arise in response to food signals. Our brains are always looking for ways to acquire calories and nutrition because food was scarce in the environment that we evolved in. So 100,000 years ago, if there was a caveman, we could call him Thag, Thag, then he might have seen a monkey and followed it to a banana tree. The monkey would have been the food signal. The bananas would have been the food reward. And after he went to the banana tree and ate as much as he could, by the way, he would consume mass quantities because food was scarce, and brought back as much food as he could to his wife and family. Then the next time that Thag's brain saw a monkey, it would flood him with dopamine and make him really excited to follow that monkey to the next tree. And Thag would see monkeys, get all excited about monkeys, follow the monkey to the tree. The monkey would correspond in today's environment to the sign for the donut store, or the, or the coffee place, or it could even be the warmth of the sun at the beach and the smell of the salt air that leads to buying ice cream at the, at the ice cream vendor's place. Um, and we kind of experience these as memories, but we don't realize that there's a chain of events that occurs before you have the craving, that signals the availability of the reward. What the brain is actually doing is it's looking to cut down on the amount of work that's necessary to find food. So, oh, I could randomly go search for banana trees, or I could follow a monkey, right? Um, okay. So then imagine what happens if Thag follows a monkey after weeks of finding bananas every time he follows a monkey. What happens when he follows a monkey to a tree that's empty? Do you think his brain would give up and he would just stop following monkeys at that point? The answer to that is no. His brain wouldn't give up, because a monkey that could lead you to a banana tree 90% of the time is better than no monkey at all. It's better than just randomly wandering around looking for banana trees. And so Thag's brain would actually double down at that point. As a matter of fact, following a monkey that only leads to a banana tree half the time, or even 20% of the time, is better than just randomly looking for bananas. So Thag's brain would double down on the dopamine and double the reward, make him even happier and more motivated to go follow the monkey to the tree. This is called intermittent random reinforcement, right? Or variable ratio reinforcement. And it's the most motivating reinforcement schedule in the behavioral literature. The reason for that is that we don't know when the behavior is going to lead to the reward. So we kind of feel compelled to execute the behavior every time. Think of the ladies that get stuck at the slot machines in Las Vegas. They feel like they have to be there. They keep pulling the arm, pulling it, because you never know when it's going to pay off, right? This is why it's more difficult to extinguish cravings than people think, and why they misunderstand the extinction curve. People think, let's say that I'm eating too many donuts on the way home from work as I pass this particular store. They think that if I made a decision that I'm not going to stop at the store anymore, that my cravings are going to kind of go like this, down in a straight line. But that's not how it works. What happens is there is a little bit of relief in a honeymoon period, and then all of a sudden there is a worse craving burst than you've ever had before. This is your brain doubling down to see if the reward for that food signal, the signal might be the donut store sign, has that reward become intermittently and randomly available. So it's trying to double down your effort because it doesn't want to give up what it's learned. It's found a way to acquire calories without much effort. It found a signal that leads to the acquisition of calories. It doesn't want to give up. This is in the literature, this is called an extinction burst. It happens for a daily habit somewhere between 4 and 10 days. I more affectionately call it the "where the F are my donuts" reaction, because the brain is just used to getting it every time it sees the sign. So you've got this "where the F are my donuts" reaction. What happens then for most people is that they misinterpret what's going on. They say, this is too hard. I'm never going to be able to tolerate these cravings indefinitely. I'm going to be tortured like this indefinitely. And so they then have the donut. And at that point, what have they done? They've proved to the brain that it was really good that you double down on the craving, because this was randomly, intermittently available. And so, yippee, you better double down again the next time that it seems to be unavailable. So they do the exact wrong thing there. They reset the curve, and they have to go through it again. They make the craving even worse. Instead of what you say is that this is temporary. It's going to go in for a couple of days, and then it's going to start to get a lot better. And you ride the curve down. Then the brain starts to let go, and get towards labeling the craving as dormant. Somewhere around 20 days, you're hardly feeling any cravings at all. 20 to 25 days, you're hardly feeling any cravings at all. People at that point often get a little cocky and they say, I've got this. Donuts aren't a problem for me anymore. And then again, they'll randomly reinforce it and they'll go all the way back to the beginning, teaching them, right? What you want to do is write it all the way out. Somewhere between 25 and 30 days or so, you have a a little mini really after my donuts, but it's just a little burst. And then your brain will label the craving as dormant because it's also a survival advantage to be able to recognize when food signals no longer lead to reward so you don't waste energy on it. And that's why we don't crave things that we know we're never going to have. So this is how the extinction curve looks when you're when you're totally eliminating the reward, when you're just going to give up the donut entirely. But let's say, because your question was about abstinence versus moderation,
Right.
let's say I don't want to give up donuts entirely, right? What you could do is say, I only ever have donuts on Monday afternoons after a good workout, and I'll never have more than two. What actually happens in that case is the food signal becomes more complex. It's like it's not one monkey, it's kind of a group of monkeys. And the brain can actually recognize this, and it will extinguish every other situation except for that very specific food signal. So when those three things come into play, when I've worked out, it's Monday afternoon, and I know I'll have no less than two donuts, no more than two donuts, then your brain will initiate the craving. But in all the other situations, it will extinguish the craving because your brain is actually pretty smart. This is why we can drive and we know what a red light means and a yellow light means and what a yield sign means. We're capable of understanding complex stimuli as they relate to food signals. What I find as a practical basis is that 2 out of 3 people can use this technique to moderate a given food substance. It varies from person to person, and it varies from substance to substance. So I don't find that someone is quote unquote an abstainer or a moderator. I find that most people have things they need to abstain from, and most people have things they need to moderate. I can't eat chocolate. I have to abstain from chocolate, but I can plan out some flour now and then if I keep it really bound to a specific context. Um, the last thing I want you to know about cravings is that because they're bound to specific food signals, people make the mistake of thinking that they failed when they've actually just neglected a particular signal. So let's say I go through this 30-day extinction curve and the donut store sign is no longer bothering me. I can drive by the store, no problem. I start to wonder why I even was a problem in the first place. But then somewhere around the 2 month mark, my mom invites me over for lunch on a Saturday, and she's got a big tray of donuts there because she always had that. She always served donuts on Saturday afternoons. And I've got worse cravings than I ever had in my life. I go there, I can't believe it. I feel like I could eat the whole bunch. My inner pig will say, see, this stuff doesn't work. You failed, you failed, you failed. This is never going to work. You're going to be tortured. But I didn't fail. I succeeded at extinguishing the donut store sign in that particular donut store as a signal for the donuts. I I neglected the other possibilities that could trigger the donut craving. And I have to go through an extinction curve for that as well. So that's really important because people are constantly thinking that they're a failure, and that's why they feel hopeless and powerless, and they can't seem to get through this. Um,
Yeah,
so
it's a
I'll
terrible feeling to feel like food has control over you and that you
yeah,
can't say no and you can't walk. Because I've had that with, I had a terrible problem with sugar. So I'm like you, I don't go there. I allow myself a very small piece of dark chocolate, and it's one square. And it's funny hearing you talk about that. It's like my brain knows that that's what you get. You're getting one square, and I'm completely fine with it. I can moderate that. But if I were to start in having the pie or the cookies, which I had all these things on the daily, and then my method of dealing with it was I was a runner. So I would go out and run off my
yeah,
whatever whatever
yeah.
I had, and I got away with it. That was the problem. Actually, it actually
I did
wasn't a
too
good
when I
thing.
was young. When I was young, I did too. Yeah, it's called exercise bulimia.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. I would punish myself with boot camps and cycling and running and just all of the cardio things, and that's how I got through that. But it's really interesting to me. Now, you talked about cravings. We've got cravings, and then the emotional aspect, emotional eating, and then there's boredom eating, and then there's binging. Are all of these part of the same, or are all of these different? Do you know what I mean?
well, Emotions can serve as a stimulus or a food signal that it that indicates the availability of the reward. Like on the Golden Girls, when someone breaks up with Maud and she comes and tells the other girls, and they say, "Okay, I'll get the cheesecake." Um, that develops because emotional eating is actually a fairly complex phenomenon. It's not what people think. It develops because the nervous system has difficulty conducting the emotions when the digestive system is overloaded with digestive tasks. The blood is funneled away, and there's just not enough physiological resources for you to experience emotions, which are also a physiological state, by the way. An emotion is a particular physiological state coupled with a cognitive label. So there's a kind of anesthetic effect on the emotions of overeating. And this is why people say they're eating to numb out or they want comfort food. It's because you don't feel the emotions as strongly. However, there's more going on than that. People think it's this one-way relationship where you feel anxious or depressed and then boom, you're overeating. And so they think this is the cause, and as a consequence, they think that they have to solve the emotional traumas and heal the emotional traumas before they can stop. So first of all, you can actually sever the link between emotional trauma and overeating. It takes a long time to heal emotional traumas. But just like you can create a fireplace around a roaring fire, there's this opportunity, there's this intervening space where there's actually a justification. Oh, nobody could really live with being broken up with and feeling so rejected and abandoned without cheesecake, right? You actually have your food monster or your little pig inside saying, this is justified, no one's going to blame you. And so you actually have the opportunity to open up that space and disempower that. And uh, there's more you can do. You can pause, you can breathe, you can take care of that distress in other ways. So it's not as simple as it might seem. There's this opportunity. The second thing is you're not really just numbing out because the foods that we eat have a stimulatory impact also. They're like a chocolate bar is filled with theobromine and caffeine and sugar and fat, and it's an unnatural concentration of pleasure that doesn't exist in nature. And another word for that would be a drug. It's just this happens to be legal. And so I tell people to say, rather than I'm eating for comfort or to numb out, that I'm eating to get high with food. I'm being like an addict trying to get high with food, and that makes it a little less appealing to them to do that, and gives them a little more space between that stimulus and response. But there's another very interesting part of this. It turns out that it's not a one-way relationship, emotions to food. It actually goes both ways. The food actually reinforces the emotions. For example, a lot of people say they feel too anxious to go to sleep without eating a whole bunch of carbohydrates. They need a big plate of pasta or a couple of muffins or something like that. And I'll explain to them that anxiety is actually a physiological experience. I could measure their blood pressure or perspiration or respiration or galvanic skin response. So we'd probably see a little uptick when they were feeling anxious. And when we do mammalian studies on this, and we reward, for example, baboons for having slightly higher blood pressure, it turns out that those baboons learn how to manufacture higher blood pressure on a more regular basis. It goes down a little bit when you give them the sugar, but if you measure them every day when they're not eating, their blood pressure is higher than the baboons that weren't rewarded with sugar when they had high blood pressure. What that says is that your body is always trying to figure out what results in the acquisition of calories, because it was hard to find calories. It's very well attuned to what results in the acquisition of calories, and it will try to repeat that experience. What that means is that you may be creating the anxiety by overeating at night in the first place. So you think that you're relieving it, but it's only temporary. You actually might be creating higher anxiety. This happens with cigarettes also. It actually smoking brings you up on a regular basis until you have the cigarette when it takes you down a little bit. But if you didn't smoke at all, you'd be down here. And so when I help people to kind of have mechanisms to tolerate the anxiety for, a few nights until their brain starts to let go of the connection, they often will find that anxiety is not as bad as they as they thought it was in the first place. So it's a very complex thing. The bottom line is that what you want to do is tell yourself you're going to sever the link between the emotion and overeating, that it's okay to write out the emotions. They often don't last as long as you think they're going to last, and they're not as intense as you think they're going to be if you're willing to write it out. Um, and create very simple rules that are easy to follow, that, not like really ridiculous lose 30 pounds in 30 days kind of diets, but, just gradual small step towards a healthier, fitter body, and learn how to play this game so that you can win.
Mm. It's so interesting to me, the links between the emotions and the physiology, and then how we can, going back to that neuroplasticity, we can rewire the brain to think differently. But there is that period of time that individuals have to be uncomfortable. I remember having to sit with my discomfort
Hmm.
as I moved away from sugar. And, you had mentioned, I think, the word torture. It does feel like torture when you're trying to sever those ties.
Hmm.
My method was I used a lot of distraction. So I would get that impulse to go into the kitchen, have something sweet, the cookie, whatever, and I would be like, okay, there's a yoga class at 4, get in the car, go to the yoga class, walk the dogs, pick up a book, anything to move myself away from that. Have you found that to be helpful for
Yeah.
individuals?
Yeah. And what you're doing in that situation, you're not only distracting yourself, but each one of those things involves a little bit of a dopamine hit. Um, Yoga also involves a type of parasympathetic breathing, which takes you
Mhm.
out of the emergency response system and makes it okay to kind of chill and rest and relax and digest, and think about your long-term plans. And so I once had a kind of a bad date with a woman who happened to tell me that she stopped binging when she started doing yoga at night instead. And I was fascinated because I really like yoga, but I didn't really understand what was going on. And it turns out that if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, which they encourage you to do, especially at the end of a yoga class,
Mhm.
um, you're telling your brain that there's no emergency here. If I was running from a hungry bear, I'd have to go right. But if I breathe out, let's say if I breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11, I'm telling my brain that there's no hungry bear chasing me. And that takes me to a state where I'm more likely to be able to use my rational brain. Also, there's a natural pleasure involved in going through a yoga class. It's a little uncomfortable for part of it, but when you're done, there's a sense of like relaxation and calmness, and like everything's okay with the world, which also involves an elevation of dopamine, which is a little more sustainable than the elevation of dopamine you would get from having binged. When you get outside for a couple of minutes, when you hug your dog, I love dogs. You're relieving organismic distress. So you're not ignoring the fact that you're experiencing this distress and that's producing the craving in some way. You're relieving that. You can also ask yourself, is there an authentic nutritional need at this point? Like when I finally quit chocolate, it wasn't just because I made a rule that said you will never have chocolate again. It it was because I simultaneously started experimenting with um, different types of green smoothies. And I found if I had a kale celery banana smoothie, or sometimes just a celery banana smoothie, that my craving for chocolate would go away. I wouldn't get as happy or as high with food as I would with the chocolate, but there was a kind of a contentment. Nothing felt urgent anymore. I didn't feel tortured by not being able to have the chocolate. Other things like making sure you have enough water, making sure you have enough sleep, making sure that you get outside a few minutes a day, stepping away from the rat race. Decision making wears down your willpower. Willpower is only the ability to make good decisions, and there are only so many you can make every day. So when you incorporate things into your life that otherwise give you dopamine, that otherwise relieve the organismic distress, then it's a kind of a fancy word for stress, but it's a very specific physical term. When you do things that relieve that, then this craving is less likely to be torturous, it's less likely to be sustained, and it's much more likely to be a resistible craving that you can serve. So it's kind of a whole package. You want to figure out how to set up this tripwire so you know when the reptilian brain is active. Then how do you disempower it with breathing and all of these techniques for reducing stress? And then how do you disempower it by showing it why it's wrong? You put that all together and you get a really phenomenal result. So that's um,
Mm.
that's how it comes together.
I think it's so helpful for the listeners to hear this because most of my listeners are women. They're women over 50, and many of them have struggled with emotional eating or binging for many, many years. And just having these tactical, I'm very big on step-by-step tactical, what can I do to deal with this? You mentioned journaling earlier. Is that something you recommend people do? Because I'm a big fan of journaling for various reasons, not just for food issues, but
I'm
just
a big fan of journaling for various reasons. Also, I do it every day. But part of the method involves keeping a pen and paper or a smartphone with you, so that at the very least you can write down why your pig wants you to break the rules. See, when you see something in black and white, the logical fallacies within it become apparent. There are also limitations to your short-term memory that don't exist when you're journaling. So you can get all the reasons out on paper that you won't see if you're just trying to do this in your head. And and then the journal becomes something you can reference. So I mean, the whole reason I had a book was because I kept a journal for 8 years of all the things that my pig said and why it was wrong. And I would go back to them and I would make the refutation stronger and I would make them a little more concise and pithy so I would remember them. So I'm very much in favor of journaling, yes. And writing is an upper brain activity.
it
Like
is.
you wouldn't be writing if you were being chased by a hungry bear. So the very fact that you write it down puts you a little bit more in your rational brain. So yeah, it's very helpful.
Agreed. Agreed. I didn't want to do it initially. I actually did not like journaling, even though I like to write. I didn't like the idea of journaling, never kept a diary, any of that. And once I did it, and especially like using timelines and things like any kind of writing, you just have a lot of aha moments. It can really trigger, the right kind of trigger your thoughts to go, "Oh, okay, I get it. This is why this is happening, or why I'm doing this, or why I'm thinking this, because it's down on that paper and
Mhm.
coming from that rational brain." So useful. Now, when you're working with patients, you're working with clients, are you taking them through a program or a step-by-step process with this?
Yeah, well, I mean, the step-by-step process. I call them clients, not patients, by the way, because I'm not offering treatment. I'm offering training and
Mm-hmm.
education for legal reasons mostly. And so I tell people that if they have a diagnosable disease disorder or condition, that they need to have treatment for it elsewhere. But I do have a step-by-step method. It's a very step-by-step method. It's outlined in the book in full. I didn't hold anything back. You can, uh, I'll tell them at the end where they can get a copy of the book for free. And then we get a lot of requests for coaching. So I do have a coaching program. We've worked with over 2,000 people over the course of the last 8 years or so in my previous company. This is a new company now. Um, and I think that's the answer to your question. So the answer is yes. We
Yes.
take them through a step by step. Yeah, we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Livingston, I want to be respectful of your time. This has been so valuable. I've learned things, and I know the listeners, the audience has learned things as well. As we start to wrap up, first of all, was there anything I didn't ask or that we didn't cover you want the listener to know? And then secondly, how can they get a copy of your book?
I would just want them to know to start with one simple rule. Something you could and would do that wouldn't be too onerous. I'll never go back for seconds, or I always put my fork down between bites, or something you could and would do that would point you in the right direction, just so you can play the game. Um, you can get a copy of the book as well as some other free things at defeatyourcravings.com. If you click the big blue button and sign up for the reader bonuses, you'll get a copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. Those formats are free. The traditional formats have traditional charges. We do have Audible and paperback and hardcover available. And when you sign up for the free reader bonuses, you will also get a set of recordings. I know that it sounds, there's a lot to it, and I know it sounds a little harsh that Carol has this doctor who's got a pig inside of him on the show today.
I love
um,
it.
but I wanted you to hear that this is actually a very life-giving, compassionate process that takes people from feeling hopeless and powerless and confused about food to feeling hopeful and confident and powerful in just one session. So I recorded a whole bunch of full-length coaching sessions. I wanted you to be able to hear that. Those are all free. And then I also created a set of food plan starter templates. So, personally, I'm a whole foods plant-based person,
Mhm.
but we work with people who are ketogenic or point counters or calorie counters or um, carnivores or vegans. It doesn't really matter. As long as you're not trying to starve yourself, we can usually help. So it's all at defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button and sign up for the free reader bonuses. And we'll look forward to interacting with you there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Livingston. Again, this has been so valuable. I encourage the readers to go to that link. All of it will be in the show notes, and grab all of these great free resources that Dr. Livingston has created. So generous. And thank you again.
Thank you, Carol. Bye, everybody.
And to our listeners, wherever you are in the world, we wish you every blessing. Bye bye.